Shawna Bowers is a women's health coach, women's health advocate, hormone coach, and pro-life educator. With a heart for empowering women and a passion for uncovering the root causes of hormonal health challenges, she has dedicated her life to helping women thrive naturally. As a former clinical laboratory scientist with over 14 years of experience, Shawna blends science and compassion in everything she does. Her personal journey through PCOS, infertility, and the struggle to find answers in traditional healthcare led her to discover the beauty and resilience of the female body and the importance of addressing health holistically. Today, Shawna uses her expertise to educate women about their God-given design, offering practical tools for hormonal balance, cycle health, and overall vitality. She's especially passionate about equipping women with natural solutions to address hormonal imbalance and empowering them to make informed, life-affirming health decisions. Please help me welcome Ms. Shawna Bowers.
No, you're not going to hold my hand, sweetie. Just go sit down. Sorry, I have a partner. So please, can you just go sit in one of those chairs? Or you can sit right there. All right. Yeah, as he said, my name is Shawna Bowers, and it really is an honor to be with you guys today. Today, we're going to just talk a little bit about the issue of birth control. It's something that is often misunderstood and misused in our current culture. Now, I know that we all understand from a pro-life aspect why birth control is not the route to go when we're considering our family planning and stuff like that, but today I want to take this conversation just a little bit different direction and talk about it in terms of what it often gets used for, and that is as a fix for women's health issues. So I want to start with this common scenario. Let's meet this gal. She's 17 years old. We're going to call her Sarah today. She has been experiencing some irregular cycles, painful cycles, just wants to stay home in bed, doesn't want to go to school on those days. She's starting to notice some acne, and she just, in general, feels kind of lousy. So her mom makes her an appointment with their local doctor. They go in, discuss her concerns, and the doctor's quick answer is to put her on birth control. She's told that's going to fix the problem, regulate her cycles, and help her feel better. It sounds like the perfect solution. Should she take the birth control? Should she take it for the sake of her health? She's 17 years old. She's not sexually active. She's waiting for marriage. Should she take it? Kind of takes the ethical dilemma out of it. Is it the right call? If you're her mom, what do you encourage her to do? You know how miserable she's been. She could be just like the 5 million American women that take birth control simply for symptom management. But the honest truth is that doesn't fix anything. In fact, it's going to leave Sarah with a lot more problems down the road. In doing so, it's going to open up a whole cascade of problems. That hormonal birth control can cause physical symptoms, it can cause mental problems, and even the way we spiritually feel can all be impacted by birth control. So to understand why birth control is not the solution Sarah's looking for and that we should not be settling for, we first have to take a good look at what hormones are. Let's start there. Hormones are simply chemical messengers. They're just little itty bitty teeny tiny molecules in our body that go around and bind to different organs, different cells in our body, turn on and turn off different mechanisms so that our body knows what to do. We find hormones like insulin that tell our cells when to pull blood sugar out of the blood and into a cell. We find hormones that, like our thyroid hormone, that tell our heart to beat faster or our body temperature to rise. They're hormones that do literally everything in our body. They control everything from our mood to how we sleep, to how we digest our food, to obviously our fertility cycle. But it's really something that we have to get out of thinking of hormones as being just related to our reproduction. It impacts every aspect of our life. So for women, our hormone cycle is actually considered our 5th vital sign. So much like when you go to a doctor and they take your temperature or your heart rate, how fast you're breathing, for a woman, a well-charted cycle is actually her 5th vital sign. What her period is like, what the entire month is like, gives major clues into the woman's health. So we often think of our hormones as just being estrogen and progesterone for women, and those two are incredibly important. They do amazing things, but not just for our reproductive cycle. They are what keep our bones strong. They are what gives us they set off a cascade of things that help us sleep well. They impact our mood. Those cellular receptors that I was just talking about a little bit, they are on every cell in our entire body. So our progesterone impacts our brain. It actually provides a very calming mechanism to our brain. So when we start disrupting this cycle, we really start disrupting every aspect of our health, not just our fertility cycle. So whether it be a poor diet or environmental toxins, whether it be stress, disruptions to our sleep, all of these things can impact our hormones, and it can manifest in symptoms. We can see things like irregular cycles, those mood swings, fatigue, and so much more. Those symptoms, we have to start thinking about symptoms as being our body's way of communicating with us. Our symptoms are not something that we should suppress, but something we should listen to. And in listening to them, we also need to take a moment and realize that a hormone imbalance is actually not a diagnosis. And we should stop settling for that as a diagnosis, because that hormone imbalance is happening because of something else. Something else has happened upstream to trickle down to cause that hormone imbalance that we are now experiencing. So that's one thing that I absolutely love to do, is help women dig deeper and figure out what's the root cause of that imbalance. So let's break down what birth control is and how it really works, because I feel like a lot of people don't really understand the mechanism. And because we're often told, if we are experiencing hormone imbalances, that birth control is the answer, we first need to understand really what it's doing to us. Most hormonal birth control works in a few different ways. There's three main ways. The two that we're going to really address today is the fact that, one, it attempts to stop ovulation, and two, it changes the uterine lining. So whether it is a pill, a patch, or an injection, its real goal is for those artificial hormones, those lab-made compounds that look similar to a hormone but aren't, to get in there and try to convince our body not to ovulate. It's trying to override our natural rhythm. So instead of ovulating, and experiencing that natural cycle, the hormones suppress the ovulation, and they actually work to thin the uterine lining. And this is where, as a pro-life person, you really have to consider whether or not birth control is ever anything you would want to consider. Because that uterine lining is made to support a pregnancy, right? That's the ebb and flow that happens each month. The estrogen and progesterone really build that uterine lining to support a pregnancy. Well, birth control also works to minimize that lining so that it's not really there. So it's, in theory, will suppress ovulation, although that does not happen nearly as effectively as they will tell you that it does. And so what happens is an egg can still be released, it can still get fertilized, and it can grow, and that can be a beautiful life, right? We believe that life starts at conception. God willed that life to be. And it starts dividing and growing, and it can take up to 2 weeks for that egg to go down the fallopian tube and into the uterus to implant. So for 2 weeks, that baby is growing and dividing and becoming a person, and then there's no place for it to land, and then it will die. So that's why, if you didn't already know, that's why we say we don't believe in birth control, because we could potentially be ending the life of a baby, not even realizing that that's what's happening. Most women don't have any clue that that's what birth control actually does. So it really, if we actually get the ovulation suppressed, which doesn't always happen, but if we do, we're basically convincing our brain and our body that we are in a state of artificial infertility. So it stops some of that production of our natural estrogen and progesterone, so we're losing those amazing benefits that we get from the estrogen and progesterone. I mean, God made them for a reason, right? We're supposed to have them. It does so much more than just our fertility. We're losing that protective mechanism for our bones and our brains and our heart. All of that is getting lost when we take the birth control. Okay. All right, so No, honey, I'll push the button. So studies have shown that hormonal birth control can really have far-reaching effects. It's not just what we're seeing in, far-reaching effects, not just within our reproductive health, but our physical side effects. So physically, we can see massive disruption to our body. It can lead to nutrient deficiencies. We can cause gut damage, which in turn leads to the nutrient deficiencies. It causes some weight gain, some migraines, an increased risk of stroke, which is probably the only one most people ever hear about, is that that there might be an increased risk of stroke, especially if you're a smoker. Well, guess what? The increased risk is definitely there no matter whether you're a smoker or not. It can cause inflammation and, like I said, impaired nutrient absorption. That's mainly because what we're doing is we're damaging the gut lining. So when it gets in there and it damages that gut lining, we are essentially, I guess, let's explain this. Put this down. Our gut lining is a series of cells that are supposed to be really tightly knit together. And anytime we take something that disrupts that gut lining, we are basically creating little gaps within those cells. And so when they're nice and tight, our food gets broken down the way it's supposed to, and the little itty bitty molecules that our body actually needs fit through those itty bitty cracks, just the way it's supposed to happen, gets absorbed into our bloodstream and we can utilize them. But when we take something like too many antibiotics or birth control, there's a number of things. Environmental toxins are notorious for this as well. It starts breaking those apart a little bit, and we get what we call increased gut permeability. So all of a sudden these gaps are bigger, and so things can start fitting through there that weren't supposed to fit through there, right? And so all of a sudden we get these molecules getting through that gap that are much larger than molecules that could fit through this gap, right? And so when we get those things coming into our bloodstream, our body starts seeing them as foreign because they're not supposed to be there yet. And so then our body starts attacking them because it says this is an invader, and that increases our inflammation response then, right? Because our body's saying, go get it, that's not supposed to be here, and it kicks our body into overdrive. And so then we get chronic inflammation, which can lead to autoimmune diseases, which is why when we are women that are on birth control, we see a huge incidence then of them being diagnosed later in life with IBS and Crohn's, because they have damaged that gut lining, sometimes past the point of repair, right? And so then we also see an increased risk, and this is my own personal story, I'll share a little bit more about this in a minute. Our thyroid is incredibly susceptible to inflammation. So women who have taken birth control, down the road, we find out now they have Hashimoto's thyroiditis because their antibodies, their body thinks it's trying to attack these foreign invaders, turns on itself and starts attacking other things. So we see the attack of the thyroid. It's very common for women down the road, even though they maybe stopped taking the birth control 10, 15 years ago, we still see massive amounts of these autoimmune diseases later on that are directly linked to the birth control use. That's just the physical side. Mentally, it massively impacts the way our brain works. Not right now, sweetheart. So I said that we have those cellular receptors everywhere, including our brain. Our brain needs progesterone. It has to have it. There's a whole set of things that happen up there that help keep us calm and keep us level. And so when we are taking birth control that massively impacts the way our brain is working, what do we see? We see depression, we see anxiety, we see just this flattened emotional state where women just don't feel like themselves anymore because we have literally altered our brain chemistry. There's even some research being done that women who take birth control, it changes who they're attracted to in a mate. So maybe you're gonna pick somebody as a husband that you wouldn't have picked otherwise. It just is incredible, the things that happen in our brain. And so then you can imagine what that does for you spiritually as well when you are not yourself, because you have altered that brain chemistry. Okay, so my thought on that is, if we, and I guess I didn't say this either. Let me back up a moment. There's also a lot of research that then shows irreversible damage to our reproductive system, right? We have turned it off for long enough that for some women, it just won't turn back on. Many women will notice that for a few months, a year, but for a lot of women, it just doesn't ever really reconnect that communication that we have turned off between the brain and the ovaries. So if we value life, we really should be questioning the practices that make it hard or sometimes impossible for a woman to create life down the road. So I know you've heard, and many of you even have memorized Psalm 139:14. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. What does that have to do with our hormones? Well, ladies in here, I want you to take a moment and acknowledge something truly powerful. You were designed by God with intention, care, and purpose. All of you, your whole body, not just a piece of it. Your body is not a mistake, and your hormones are not a burden. The world will try to tell us otherwise, though. I think we've all seen that firsthand, right? We are told that birth control is the way to regulate a cycle, that our natural rhythms are inconvenient, that we should suppress what God has designed. But our bodies were never meant to be controlled with synthetic hormones. God created an intricate, beautiful system within us. Our cycles are not random. There is purpose. Every phase, every hormonal shift, every phase of life is part of His design. So if we're experiencing symptoms, we need to listen to them, not shut them up. Symptoms are our body's way of communicating. So when we manipulate our body with birth control, we're basically turning off that communication system. And we are disrupting what God has fearfully and wonderfully made. But I want to take a little bit and talk to you about what options there are then. Because many women, Micah, go sit down. Yes. Okay. Many women then say, well, but what is my option? I feel terrible. My imbalances are awful and I need something. Like I've got to fix this. I know that something's not right. What do I do? Well, instead of working against God's design, we start working with it and we start acknowledging that He has given us the skills and the ability to figure out the body that we live in. So, most of the time, our imbalances have one of these 5 root causes. Our symptoms, our hormonal imbalances, they are a symptom of something else. They are downriver of one of these things. So our gut health, we kind of talked about that, how birth control can disrupt our gut health. So that ends up being a double-edged sword. But, we maybe have a gut health problem and then we start taking the birth control, which leads to more gut health problems. And then we just find ourselves in a very vicious cycle that is hard to get out of. So our gut health, I keep scrolling on this. Okay, so our gut health obviously is foundational of all of our health. That's where all of our nutrients get absorbed. That's where all of that stuff starts to happen. But it's also where our hormones are metabolized. So we have a whole set of bacteria in our gut that their primary job is to metabolize estrogen to help package it up and send it on down the road when we're done with it. So if we are not taking care of our gut, that estrogen is going to start backing up into our body. We're going to start reabsorbing it, and we're going to get signs of estrogen dominance. We're going to get headaches. We're going to have all kinds of things happening. So we've got to take care of our gut. Our gut health can be compromised because of poor diet. So if we're eating things like overly processed foods, lots of sugars, if we've been taking a lot of antibiotics in our life, all of that starts to disrupt the bacteria in our gut microbiome, and then also that gut lining, that permeability that I was talking about, all happens when we start taking too many of those things or we eat those foods we shouldn't be eating. And so we get that. There's a whole lot of stuff that starts happening, right? We don't absorb the nutrients that we need. So we don't have the building blocks that we need to make the hormones, right? And so then we don't have the hormones that we need because we didn't have the stuff to make it. And then we're not eliminating the stuff that we did make, and we just get this whole cascade of problems. So To support our gut, we need to be eating a lot of fiber-rich foods. We need to be eating fermented foods. That microbiome in there is all those good, happy bacteria that we want there. So we've got to replenish those. So that's, like I said, fermented foods, things like sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha are excellent sources for that. And then we want to make sure we're eating whole, nutrient-dense foods. We got to get away from the processed stuff. That's just a whole lot of things that are not good for us and not how God designed our food source to be. So if we're taking a high quality probiotic is another great thing to do for your gut health. Making sure you have, like I said, that plenty of fiber. That serves as what we would call a prebiotic, meaning it's the stuff that feeds the probiotic, the bacteria that we're putting back in there. And we really got to get rid of the artificial refined things. The next thing is our liver function. Now, we always think of our liver as being our filter, and it is, but it does a lot more than just that. So yes, it detoxes. So as our body is producing these hormones, we use them, we're finished with them. Our liver is actually what's going to package them up and then send them to our gut. So we got to have that functioning. But also there's some hormones that are produced in our gut. So we need, or in our liver, excuse me. And so we need our liver to be functioning at its best. Things that we can do is make sure we're not overburdening our liver. This is where a lot of us, myself included, have a tendency to overlook our environment. What are we using to clean our homes? What are we using in our skincare? What are we using to wash our laundry? Many of these things, anything that has an artificial fragrance in it, is a toxin that your liver has to then try to clean out. And so if your liver is too busy working on all of those other things, it can't do its job of producing hormones and then also getting rid of the hormones that we're done with. And so we're gonna get symptoms of hormone imbalance if our toxin level is too high. So supporting liver health is gonna be liver-friendly foods. So things like cruciferous vegetables, so I'm talking like Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, broccoli, things like that are excellent for our liver. They have a compound in them called DIM, D-I-M. It's a really long scientific name that I can never say correctly, but that is even a supplement that you can take to really help support that liver function. We need to avoid alcohol and caffeine in excess. And again, those processed foods. They have those toxins in them that then our body has to try to get rid of. Supplements like milk thistle and dandelion root are fantastic for supporting our liver and helping it do its job. The next thing on the list of a possible root cause is our adrenal health. Now, our adrenal glands are little bitty, like triangular shaped glands that sit on top of our kidneys in our back. And most people think of our adrenal glands in terms of our cortisol. That's where our stress hormone comes from. And our stress hormone, cortisol, gets a lot of bad rap. Right? We think of it as being responsible for, excess weight around our middle, and we hear all the, there for a while there was a ton of commercials on how terrible cortisol fat is and all that kind of stuff. And that is true. We don't want too much cortisol, but cortisol is what's responsible for our fight or flight mechanism. It's designed to help us respond to the stresses of our daily life, especially, if we were to be chased by a bear, we would want that cortisol to kick in and help us hightail it out of there. However, when our body is doing that, it's seeing whatever's stressing us as being a life or death situation. And so it's trying to get us to move. It's trying to get us to do other things. And the last thing it wants us to be thinking about is whether or not it's a good time to have a baby. So it's going to turn that off while it's producing the cortisol, because it says, I don't need to worry about that. That is not a problem right now. And even then, our progesterone and cortisol use the same precursor building block. And so our body will take that and it will stop producing progesterone and it'll move it over to make the cortisol. So it says, this is more important, we're gonna do this, the other things stop. So if we're not making progesterone, we're not having a cycle, all of these other things start happening, and this was my story. We start ending up with conditions like PCOS and other things because the stress levels are too high and our body turns the other things off. So that's a very common one that gets overlooked in terms of the reasons we can see hormonal imbalances. So again, this is where supporting our adrenal glands is a little bit different. Yes, there are supplements we can take, like B vitamins and things like that are fantastic for our adrenal gland. But this is one where we really have to look inward and figure out what we need for our stress response. So self-care, prayer time, all of these are actually really valuable to establishing our hormone balance. So making sure we get enough sleep, like the 7 to 9 hours, and reducing those chronic stressors. That can be tough, but it can be done. Learning to say no is a big one, or it was for me, on figuring out how to help manage my hormones. The next one is inflammation. We kind of talked about this with that gut lining, how that permeability changes, so it sets off that whole inflammation cascade. Lots of problems start happening when that happens, mainly because we start having issues with the thyroid, which also tells our reproductive organs how to function. So ways to address inflammation are things like eating an anti-inflammatory diet. So making sure we increase our omega-3s, those healthy fatty acids. The worst thing that ever happened in terms of women's health was this low-fat diet craze. We have to have those healthy fats. Our body has to have them, or we cannot build our hormones. Fresh fruits, vegetables, herbs like turmeric are fantastic for supporting healthy inflammation. And then again, making sure we reduce those environmental toxins like too many plastics, pesticides, synthetic fragrances really disrupt our body and our inflammation. And the next one is insulin resistance. So this is something that is incredibly common in our society. And this is where our body basically is just so used to so much sugar that our body just keeps producing the insulin to try to combat. And our body just gets to a point where it just can't do it anymore. And so that it takes more and more and more insulin to get that job done of getting the blood sugar into the cells like it's supposed to. So, it's kind of like basically like a pre-diabetes state. You know, your body is it's not all the way there where your body can still utilize the blood sugar and get it out, or, you know, get that sugar out of the blood and into the cell, but it takes a lot more insulin to get that job done. And so when that happens, then that elevated insulin sends a message, because remember, all of these hormones are interconnected. Not a single one of them acts in a silo. So that insulin then tells the ovaries to actually produce more testosterone. That's the impact it has. And so then we get too much testosterone happening in a woman's body, and you can understand how that would lead to a lot of symptoms and a lot of problems. So for women with PCOS, that can be one of the number one causes of that, is actually because it started with the insulin resistance. So again, you're gonna get tired of me saying this, but the real things that we've got to do to help with insulin resistance are, again, to eat those whole nutrient-dense foods. Get away from the processed stuff. It does nobody any favors. So vegetables, lean proteins, and those healthy fats. And also prioritizing regular activity. Doesn't have to be that you're gonna go train for a marathon, but even just going for a 10-minute walk a day can have a huge impact on health. And again, there's natural supplements that we can use if need be, like inositol is a great one that actually helps your body utilize the blood sugar better and helps with that insulin resistance. So I've kind of shared a little bit, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more of my own journey with this and what kind of brought me to this place. I was 19 years old. I was in college studying to be a clinical laboratory scientist. And up until then, I thought, man, I have it made. My periods are terrible, but I have it made because all of my friends, they have to do this every month. I don't. Mine's like 6, 7, 8 weeks. Whew, thank goodness I don't have to do this every month. Because nobody ever told me otherwise, right? Nobody talks about these things. Like, you're just, shh, it's taboo. Don't say the word period out loud. Are you kidding? And so I was in college. I was studying how to test these hormones, right? Not necessarily how my body was supposed to work, but kind of the other side of things. When I get a blood sample, how do I figure out how much progesterone's in there, right? Like, that's the avenue I'm going. But in the process, I do have to learn what normal levels are and when they rise and fall and how long the cycle's supposed to be. And I'm looking at my chemistry textbook going, but that's not what mine does. Uh-oh. And so I went to a doctor. I made a phone call to a local OBGYN there in the town I was in college at and said, hey, I got a problem. And I walk in and the doctor immediately takes one look at me, doesn't ask me any questions really. I mean, other than, oh, here's a college kid with irregular cycles. Give her the birth control. I'm 19 years old, sitting there in this doctor's office, 19, 20, I don't remember what it was exactly, sitting in this doctor's office by myself. I didn't know you could ask questions. I didn't know you could say no. I just knew that my body wasn't working the way it was supposed to, and here's somebody that I'm supposed to trust as an authority telling me this is your fix. This will take care of it. That way, down the road, when you get married and are ready to start a family, your cycles will be regular. We will have regulated your cycle. If I could go back and sit in that doctor's office and try again, I would do it 100 times over. Because then when I did get married and I did get to the point where we were wanting to have a family, it was incredibly difficult. Because now I've spent 6 years covering up the problem, letting it fester, letting it just boil under the surface while I had no clue. I thought I was doing what I was supposed to do. So, first miscarriage. Okay, then we get lucky and we get this baby all the way through. Not lucky, divine intervention, right? Carry this baby through. Okay, all right, we're ready for baby number 2. Miscarriage, after we'd seen the heartbeat on ultrasound. Okay, all right, we got it this time. Miscarriage. Okay, we got it this time. And that's the little girl that keeps running back and forth here is that one. Yeah, now she's standing up in the back. And so it's like, okay. And then it was when I was trying to get pregnant with her that we finally got the diagnosis of PCOS. Finally. After all that heartbreak. And I had just covered it up for years, thinking I was doing what I was supposed to do. So, okay, we have her, everything's going great. And then this is when I started to discover natural solutions. This is when I started to figure out that I could do something different for my health. And lo and behold, not 6 months after we start changing things in our routine, we start changing my diet, we start changing the way I'm cleaning our house even, start changing my laundry detergent, and I get pregnant again, out of nowhere. Not even hardly expecting it. We thought this will never happen. We'd been told by our doctor, don't even worry about it. It's never going to happen. And, I mean, long story short, this is where I learned about the impact of stress on our body and on our health, because I went through the most stressful time in my entire life. Not even close. And I lost that baby at 16 weeks. And they'll tell me it wasn't because of the stress, but I know for darn certain it was because of the stress, because I've never been under that kind of stress at work like I was then. And I lost the baby 2 days later. So that's when I learned about the impact of stress. But then again, 3 months later, I was pregnant again and carried that baby full term. And so we actually have 3 beautiful children that medically should not be here because of the diagnosis and because of how much damage I had done to my body by taking birth control for probably about 5 years. My gut health completely destroyed. And even now I'm dealing with thyroid issues because of the birth control that I took for so many years, thinking I was doing the right thing. So I just want to share a little bit then about the things that I did find that made a huge impact on my health, and that went from us suffering miscarriage after miscarriage to having this, once we kind of made that shift and had our last daughter much easier than we had dealt with the previous things. So the first thing was obviously being aware of my cycle. I know many of you in here probably know like the Creighton method, the Marquette method. There's umpteen different ones out there for actually tracking a cycle and being aware of the biomarkers of your cycle. So that was kind of the first step, was just learning that these signs and symptoms that my body were giving me were things that I should be paying attention to and be documenting. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot about fertility awareness methods. I am not actually an educator on those. I know there are people out there that are, so touch base with them if that's something that you need to learn more about or want to learn more about. But this is where the big changes really happened for me. This was what I did. These things right here is how these natural tools are what I have used and what I now teach my clients to use. The first thing is here we go. I told you you'd get tired of me here saying it. Nutrition. What all do we need? Nutrient-dense foods and healthy fats. We have to have those things. We have to have the protein, and those healthy fats are absolutely essential. Those are the building blocks for all hormones. There's two different kinds, protein hormones and fat hormones. Those are the building blocks. Gotta have them. The next thing are supplements. We definitely want to look at targeted supplements for where our nutrition is lacking. Our goal is always to get our nutrition from our food first, but we have to fill in those gaps if they're there. So for women, it's especially important that we have those healthy fats, like a good omega-3 fatty acid. It's like a fish oil supplement. Magnesium, vitamin D, even adaptogenic herbs like ashwagandha. That's fantastic for your stress response. So that's something that's that I have found to be incredibly important in my routine. And then even essential oils. I know that seems sometimes kind of like a little woo-woo, but I promise you, there's incredible impact there. Clary sage is one that gets used in the first part of a cycle because it is a great support for our estrogen. And then things like wild yam extract are fantastic for supporting progesterone in the second half of our cycle. So we can kind of, what we call cycle sync, our use of things like supplements and essential oils. Sleep is incredibly important. That is when our body resets and kind of restores itself. So if we're not getting enough sleep, that's going to trigger a whole lot of other things to happen downstream. Because again, what starts our sleep cycle is actually a hormone, right? I'm sure you've all heard of melatonin. That's a hormone. It's another one of those that's in this whole endocrine system, and it's going to impact all of these others. So we have to be getting good quality sleep. That is something that I help a lot of clients with because they just can't sleep. And oftentimes it's because they're not maybe getting enough sunshine, so their body's not starting their circadian rhythm. This really happens a lot with women that work from home because they maybe find themselves that they haven't even gone outside in a couple of days. And so sleep is something that we really work hard on for a lot of women. Minimizing blue light before bed is also really important because that blue light convinces our brain that it's still daytime. So it's not going to release the melatonin if it thinks it's still daytime. So that's why you'll see a lot of people telling you wear blue light glasses, put your phone down an hour before bedtime, those sorts of things. It's so that we get that blue light out of our eyeballs. We want it in our eyes first thing in the morning to tell our body that it's morning. It's time to start that rhythm, but we got to get it out later in the day. And then stress management, like I told you about, that's been a big one for me. Insulin resistance causes a lot of PCOS, I said that. But what most women don't realize is that there's actually 4 types of PCOS. So I spent a lot of time trying to fix my insulin resistance until I figured out that wasn't my problem. Mine was an adrenal PCOS. Mine was all coming from my stress. So once I figured out stress management, that's when all of my symptoms really started getting erased. So things that reduce stress, journaling, prayer time, just walking, spending time outside, all really important. Chronic stress, I know you've probably heard it said, and it really is true, it's like the biggest killer because it just impacts everything. And then detoxification, I kind of mentioned this. When I started ditching toxins from our household cleaner, our laundry, I noticed a huge change in my hormones because there's endocrine disruptors in there. There's a lot of what we call xenoestrogens, which are artificial estrogens. They look like estrogen, so they get into those, what do you call them? I just lost the word. Cellular binding sites. So all of our cells have all these little binding sites on them that kind of look like this. And so our hormones come in and act like a lock and key. And that's what turns on the message inside the cell, is this hormone comes in, acts like the key to undo this lock. Well, a lot of things that we find in artificial fragrances especially are xenoestrogens, artificial, man-made. They look a lot like what God designed, so they'll fit in that key and turn on that mechanism, even though it's not really estrogen. The problem is then, because it isn't actually estrogen, it doesn't fit great. It gets forced in, and then have you ever tried to stick a key into something that it shouldn't have? Yeah, you might be able to shove it in there, but then you're not getting it back out, right? So now we've got that artificial thing stuck in there, and we've got that process happening in the cell all the time that we didn't want turned on, and now it's happening all the time because we can't get that back out. So we've got to work on detox. That's something that we really work on. I really work on with clients as well. And then obviously movement. Our body needs to move. God designed it to move. It's supposed to, right? So very important that we get the right kind of exercise, especially for women. Any kind of movement is fantastic, but when we're dealing with hormone imbalances, for a lot of women, we have to slow down the exercise they're doing. For a lot of them, they might come to me with concerns of weight gain. And so they're doing all these heavy duty exercises. They're trying to run like crazy, anything to try to get this weight to budge. And I tell them to stop. Because what they're doing is they're convincing their body that there's some reason to be running. There's something they're running from. And so then what happens is those adrenal glands kick in thinking, well, we're supposed to be running. We better keep running. And they've convinced their body that there's a stressor. And so then they get into this another vicious cycle where they've created that stress and it's gotten their body into that rhythm of thinking that there's something wrong. And so now it's created more problems. So for a lot of women, I'm like, we got to slow it down. We don't want to be doing those heavy duty, crazy HIIT workouts right now. We got to slow down. Yes, move your body, but be cognizant of what you're doing so that you're not making these imbalances worse. All right. Well, those are the things that are really important that we do. That we hit all of those areas of our health for our hormones. I just want you to realize, and maybe you're somebody that has been going through a lot of hormone imbalance issues, maybe struggling with fertility, maybe it's they're dealing with headaches, whatever it is, that those imbalances are not a life sentence, right? They're a communication, and that birth control should not be the answer. But doing these other things should be the answer. That should be what we turn to. We really do need to support our body's natural rhythms. And when we do that, we can really experience vibrant health. And then also, let's not forget that pro-life aspect here. When we work with our bodies rather than against them, we're honoring God's design for our body. When we choose these kind of more holistic, life-affirming avenues, over those synthetic options, we're respecting our life. We're respecting the potential our body has to house life. We're respecting God's design and and the natural ebb and flow that He created for us. So I really encourage you to just kind of take a little piece of this, take it back to somebody that maybe is struggling, and each one of you pick an area to focus on. It's I talked about women's health, but everybody has hormones, right? We have hundreds of different ones. And so all of them, regardless of what type of hormone we're talking about, can be supported with these things. Focus on gut health, stress management, nutrition, whatever it is. Pick something, and it'll support your hormones now and long term. So I really do appreciate your time. I hope you leave feeling a little bit empowered that even though the world says birth control is the answer, it's not. And that you can take that forward to somebody who maybe needs to hear it. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'll be over at my booth in the other room too. I'm happy to talk to anybody. My website's there, email address, so feel free to get in touch anytime. I guess that's kind of where I will leave it. Unless anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yeah?
A comment and a question.
Okay.
Comment. Seed oils
Oh,
are
yes.
the worst thing
Yep.
in the world.
Yep.
They are the reason America is the most unhealthy
Yep.
and industrialized
Yes.
country. And I hope that Bobby Kennedy
Can get those out. No.
Secretary of HHS, because we need to address that.
Yeah.
And two,
Crazy inflammatory. Yeah.
what is it? Yeah, I mean, just bad for everything. It
Yeah.
even contributes to insulin resistance.
Yes.
I mean, there's nothing bad that seed oils don't do in your body. I'm kind of curious, because I know somebody who's struggling with infertility
Mm-hmm.
right now. What are your services look like? Do you do like Zoom consultations?
Yes.
Because
Yep.
you're based out of Solomon?
Yeah, I live over in Solomon, so just out on the east side of Salina. So yeah, I work with women all across the country.
Really?
Yes, my clients right now, I've been talking to somebody out in Washington. The gal that just started this week was in Oklahoma. That's the beautiful thing about the internet, right? Is you can help and communicate with people anywhere. So I have like 3 different coaching programs. The first one is what we call the Vital Cycle 365. So that is where, Micah, please not right now, please. So that is where we just work through everything there is to really know about the woman's cycle and how vital it is to our health 365 days a year. So that's where, we talk about what is it supposed to do? How do we identify problems? What are the root causes? We start digging deep, finding what those root causes are so we can start addressing those. All starts with a 20-minute free consultation. So we just chat through what's the problem, what's going on, is this something I can help with? We really focus on educating and then addressing those root causes, restoring wellness at that root cause level. Another program that I offer currently is it's a 6 steps to ditch the pill. For a lot of women, they're ready. They're like, I don't want to be on this anymore. They learn stuff like this and like, get me off of it. But how do I do that and then hopefully try to restore some of that wellness that has been lost, right? How do I restore those nutrients that have been depleted? How do I fix the gut health that was, probably damaged? And so we have it set up. It's like an 8-week course where we meet every week and we go through the 6 steps. There's a couple of them that obviously are pretty intense, like how are we going to start restoring all this nutrition? So we spend a couple weeks on that. But yeah, at the end of the 8 weeks, they have all the tools, all the steps they need to be able to successfully get off of the birth control, knowing what may happen as far as symptoms and withdrawals and that sort of thing, and then how to reconnect with their body in a way. Because when we're taking it, we're not ourselves mentally either. So there's a lot that we do even just emotionally. How do I reconnect with who I am here when I have shut a lot of that off? So there's a lot of kind of just restoring that faith in our womanhood and that, yes, what God created is good and is right. We spend a lot of time on that too, because it really does change how we see the world in some ways. And so getting back in touch with our feminine genius is what we call it, is a really big piece of that too. And then currently, I guess it's not all the way finished yet. I am working on a post-hysterectomy and menopause course as far as how do I support my body through these, through the transitions that are happening, what's turned off and now what's happening, because that all happens once our ovaries stop producing the estrogen and progesterone. That little bit of production that we still have of those and we still definitely need comes from our adrenal glands. So how do we really keep those adrenal glands really healthy so that it can keep producing those hormones that we need to be vibrant?
And what I heard you say earlier is that the number one thing with the adrenal is to keep the stress
Yes,
levels.
right. Because otherwise it gets so bombarded trying to make cortisol that it can't do the other things. Yeah, it gets so wrapped up in that all the other stuff gets by the wayside. Because like I said, if you're under a massive amount of stress, if you're trying to run from a bear, the last thing you're doing is going, oh, hey, he's handsome. I bet he'd be a good husband. It's not the way it goes. So all of that gets turned off. Anything that's non-essential gets turned off when we're under stress.
You've explained all of this science so well.
Thank you.
This is really your gift.
Thank you.
I mean, science for the layperson. You've done a beautiful job.
Thank you.
And are you like self-taught on all of this, or did you?
Somewhat. There was a lot, obviously, in going through clinical laboratory science school that I learned. But then, after the multiple miscarriages, and like I said, between her and her younger sister was when I was like, there's got to be a better way. This can't be the way it's supposed to be. Women shouldn't be supposed to have to suffer like this. Like, what's missing here? And started really self-teaching myself, figuring it out. And then I was just then I felt stuck, like, okay, well, now what do I do with this? Well, how do I take this forward? And that's where I found the Fiat Institute, the Fiat Institute, and that is a hormone coaching certification program. I think it's this Friday, Teresa Kenny is coming and doing a talk on holistic women's health. She does a podcast, and her co-host on the podcast is the one who established the Fiat Institute. And so really trains up hormone coaches and how to go out into the world and take clients and start teaching women all of this stuff. Because most of us don't have a clue how the female cycle is supposed to work.
It's neat that God took your tragedy and
Yeah.
heartbreak and enabled you to turn it
My
into
husband,
a ministry.
my husband and I have said that countless times, that if we can help just one person not have to experience what we did, it will have been worth it. If we can just help one woman not deal with all of those struggles, to say no to the birth control to begin with, or to get off of it in a safe, effective way so that her body can heal, then all of that tragedy will have had a purpose, and it will get, it'll get used for good. God promises that all of those hard things, He works them for good. They may not be good things, but He will work them for good. Yep. Yeah.
I have a question. Do you help like teenagers, 13,
Yep.
14,
Yeah.
15-year-olds?
All ages. Yep, for sure. I like to help them the younger they are, because then it's just something they always know, right? Like, there's so much of this, and I wish I had $1 for every time I had somebody say, oh, why didn't somebody tell me this sooner? So my desire is down the road, we get another generation down the road, and like my daughter back there will never say that, because she will have always known. Yep.
I had a niece, like you said, that they put on birth control in high school because she had cramps so bad.
Yeah.
And it's like, deal with it.
But honestly, not deal with it, because if we're having extreme cramps, that's a sign of something else. There's something causing it, because even PMS is not normal. That shouldn't be happening. So, yeah, yep. Because if we're having those PMS symptoms, it's probably because we're not getting enough progesterone, that calming hormone. If we're getting the mood swings anyway, we're probably not getting enough of that nice calming hormone to our brain.
Wow.
So, yep. So, any other questions, or I can chat with anybody over in the other room too. Okay. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it at that, and I'll meet anybody over there if you need to.
Thank
But
you so much.
that's a beautiful crown.